Won't you lend your lungs to me? Mine are collapsing. Plant my feet and bitterly breathe up the time that's passed. Breath I'll take and breath I'll give. Pray the day's not poised. Stand among the ones that live in lonely indecision.
Hello, James.
Hello, Lynn.
Welcome to episode 30 of the Crackpot Podcast, featuring crackpot James LaFond and podcaster Lynn Lockhart. It's March 6th. Well, today's topic is a surprise to you, sort of. Partial surprise. But you wrote, maybe a week ago, you wrote about a bunch of YouTubers, I guess, or something that you saw, where people were just complaining about the Black Panther movie, which is undoubtedly a work of fiction.
It was every YouTuber that I subscribed to.
Had some reaction video.
At Molyneux, Red Ice Radio, I think Black Pigeon, and then two other things came up. So I had this whole sidebar with concerns of postmodern people of European descent have with this mythology that sounds like it's based partially on the legend of big-headed Yakub from Black Muslim mythos and some kind of comic book from some fertile 1960s imagination. I think even the Black Panther movement was based on the Black Panther comic book. Like, Black Panther came out first.
I think that's right. The comic book came first, but they may or may not have copied the name. It's a good name.
Yeah. It gives you an idea of the level of agency you're talking about when you're speaking of people who might believe in this. By the way, there was a Baltimore Sun letter to the editor from a lady who described herself as an African-American Democrat. And she had a revelation after she went to go see this movie. She said, after watching the movie, this isn't the type of movie I normally watch, I was really stricken with the fact that Africa could have been such a wonderful place, just like the United States, if white people hadn't gone there and taken all the water and the oil and the minerals and metals and everything
and
like that. So, right.
Yeah.
So now, in any sane world, this woman isn't allowed to vote. Anyhow, I mean, I couldn't imagine Shaka Zulu putting up with her running her yap for 2 seconds, right? She's at the back of the back row nursing a child or something. So, yes, people like this might believe in this type of comic book stuff, and many people of European descent believe in belief systems, have total faith, and will die for belief systems that seem to the purely rational mind to be just as much of a comic book treatment. I spent 4 hours watching Ben-Hur with my mother this weekend, and I really liked it as a movie, but I was able to look at it from the point of view of postmodern atheists and agnostics and Buddhists and deists that I know. And the way Christianity was presented in this movie, which would be a high budget movie like this one we're discussing, but in 1959, it would have made people in Africa laugh when they saw that. When they saw the light from the star beaming down on this stable, and all these people show up, and they all know that this is a special person being born with destiny, and 3 wise men show up, and they even have
black.
Yeah, right. So one of them's a magic Negro. Well, in Ben-Hur, Balthazar is not the black guy in Ben-Hur.
Whitewashed.
Okay, it was the coolest name. He's actually played by somebody who was of the right subgroup of European whites to run things in Hollywood, for instance. I'm sure he was played by fellas. So I thought about some of my white nationalist friends laughing, looking at this, and some of the best parts are all played by guys that were not, cast because they look like people who might have come from there, at least the way their nose was hooked. And I imagine them getting just as upset watching a movie about the birth of Christianity set in Judea, and probably getting upset because so many Jewish people were cast in roles in the movie, and probably pointing out that the one producer was whatever. And then you think of it, well, it was it was a whole Jewish thing.
Well,
So
I think that Black Panther is considerably more fictional in some ways, right? Because there was a place called Judea. We can all agree on that.
I'm sure, and there's probably no accident that Wakanda ends, at least in the spoken term, in the exact same way that Judea ends when you're speaking it. So
Rhymes.
there's no accident in that.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, people from other cultures to look at Ben-Hur, the Romans always made sense. Everything the Romans said made sense. They sounded like modern conservative or identitarian people, and everything that the sainted people in this movie said, they sounded like modern liberals. And I think it's no accident that the movie was made in 1959, and it was really reflecting the people that were depicted as the heroic, transformative figures, were reflecting the new type of thought that was coming along then. And the Romans, the things that the Romans said, and I think it was all British actors playing the Romans. You always get Brits to play Romans, I guess, in any movie. They were
Monty
saying
Python being my favorite instance of that.
They were saying the types of things that you could imagine a very upstanding American or British man of the early 1900s saying to his son or to a young man that he was helping advise. So a lot of it was really just projecting what they did is they projected the changing worldview at the time, and the Romans got saddled with what pre-World War II men thought, and the more transformative characters, like the one played by Charlton Heston, Judah Ben-Hur, is saddled with the new progressive form of thought at the time. So for the most part, any of these fictions are just going to be, particularly movies, they're always going to be projections of what we've got going on right now. You're not going to see much of anything in the movies that's going to show anything authentic from the period and have the movies sell, because you're competing for an audience that can only deal in the lowest common denominators. They can only appreciate things from their own perspective.
The reason I brought that up is because aside from Black Panther and the merits of that movie, which I will never see, but that's neither here nor there because I don't see any movies.
I'll never see it because I hate comic book movies, because I hate comic books. It's like sissy literature. It's the propaganda for illiterate Vietnamese peasants used to be little comic books.
Jeez.
Okay? It's like the crudest way that you can make a movie is a comic book, and that's why a comic book transfers. It's basically a movie storyboard.
Yeah.
So it translates very easy, so it's easy to make into a movie.
Right.
But my objection with comics and with movies is that it's more passive than art by itself, or
reading,
prose by itself, or verse by itself.
Yeah.
That's it. It's taken more of your mental process out of it, and you're being a more passive consumer of the information.
Yes, I completely agree with that, and I have more to say on that in a different topic, so maybe I'll remember, but maybe I won't. But what I'm trying to get at is that aside from the Black Panther, because really nobody cares, but there's a need, there's a desire, a human desire for people to agree with you, for people to have the same opinion and to approve of your ideas, right? It feels so good when someone says, yes, you're right, I think that's a brilliant idea, or something like that. And this is something that on the dissident right, we're basically never going to get in a mainstream setting. People are complaining specifically about Jordan Peterson. They get complaints because they don't address certain topics, which are like the extremely radioactive topics, right? So my question to you is along the lines of how do people who want this, I don't see that as a masculine desire. It's a perfectly natural human desire. What can you say about that? That
I think it's a symptom of the feminization of our society, that so many of the people that are on what is politically the masculine end of the scale, because you don't have anybody on the left that's truly masculine. That's sorted out for. On the right, you actually have a belief that masculinity is not a bad thing. Yet on the right, you still have many of the men who believe in masculinity and that a masculine approach to things is good, will still behave in a feminine pecking order ideal. They still want to be in their own group. They want to have a level of agreement that's going to equate to conformity.
Yeah.
Where you're going to agree on everything, and if you don't agree on everything, then you're going to split off. And that's just self-destructive, and that's the reason why tribal societies had confederations, because you know that you're not going to agree on everything. So you develop a confederation to put forward those aspects that all the tribes in the confederation agree on, which are probably going to be the most important things, really, because they're going to be policies that are going to address something that's a threat to every one of those tribes.
Right.
There's a real problem as far as what I saw in the titles, and because I couldn't watch any of these videos critiquing the Black Panther, but I've seen enough stuff by these different producers to know where they were going to go. And with all of them, what it did is it highlighted so it probably means I'll never be on any of these shows now, and they're all the most popular ones, but it highlighted a pre-existing propensity to complain instead of discuss something, instead of trying to work on developing a truth. They're just going to complain about something that they think is bad or that they disagree on. And for instance, I would want to, at this point, if somebody paid me to watch this movie and wanted me to do a review of it, I would try to do a positive review of it. Instead of looking for all the bad stuff, I would just look for the good stuff and see if any of it made sense. And it would be interesting to find out if the good aspects the aspects in this movie that I thought were good, it would be interesting to find out if they lined up with the aspects that this lady that wrote into the Sun paper thought was good.
Right.
Because I wouldn't declare it a good aspect if this movie was trying to tell me that basically Europeans stole all the water from Africa and that's why these people have problems. If that's actually presented in the movie, then no, that's not something that anybody with enough intelligence to make a rational decision would find compelling. It would ruin the suspension of disbelief in the narrative, and it would make the story less enjoyable for anybody that had any ability to appreciate a fictional in a historical context or even in a proper fantasy context. A proper fantasy context is not breaking, in science fiction, you don't want to break the laws of science that you know them, except for one. You're allowed to break one, and that's the supposition. If you start breaking a bunch of them, people don't want to get along with it. In a fantasy context, you don't want to break all the social norms that have threaded throughout societies. You want something that's going to be believable. You don't want to have big lumbering oafs out in the mountains conquering all these nomad tribes out on the plains. It just doesn't work. They don't have a transportation system. That would ruin it for me. If I see Genghis Khan sitting around a fire and I got this big hairy guy with a hammer beating him over the head, I'd say, well, how the hell did he get there?
Yeah.
Why didn't he starve to death? So I would look at it to see if it worked as myth. For something to work as myth, there's got to be enough truthful aspects to it to suspend disbelief, since we go into it knowing it's not true.
All right.
In that sense.
Or that it requires faith, in a miraculous occurrence. I don't want to just bash on these people that hate Black Panther and hate Jordan Peterson, but it's funny. But what's your advice, if you have any advice? For instance, these guys at some university yesterday did this again with Dickie Spencer again. Created a battle scenario with the police goading Antifa into attacking. Anyway, what's a better thing to do than look for this conformity?
Let me give you an example from combat sports and Jordan Peterson. I don't think they're two things that would normally go together in conversation. Okay, but we don't have to imagine Jordan Peterson boxing anybody. I have seen 4 or 5 appearances by him. I spent probably 2 hours one day watching Jordan Peterson clips that people sent me. They wanted to know what I thought about it.
Right.
The guy is very good at not being preyed upon effectively in a discussion. He's good at treading where words are weapons. If we're to think that there's something morally the matter with him, because he won't take his ability to negotiate this weaponized word space on behalf of what we think is the best cause. That would be like me critiquing. I could take Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes had the best jab in boxing. Nobody ever jabbed better than Larry Holmes, and he's a heavyweight. Heavyweights never do anything better than guys in the other weight classes, but Larry Holmes actually jabbed better than any little guy ever jabbed another little guy. But he was a boxer. So would I criticize Larry Holmes for not joining the NFL and using his jab in an open hand way to run the football down the field against football players? That's just stupid. If there's an interest in taking Larry Holmes' skill and his brilliant technique, using the stiff arm to keep space between you and the opponent, if you see a way that could be used in football or MMA or kickboxing, well then learn from him.
Yeah.
And it's your job to translate that into your field. And it's cross-training. It's something that I do a lot. And I think if people on the alternative right, and somehow I'm consistently now grouped in this alternative right category, even though I don't like
alt-right. Dissident, maybe. I'm going to try dissident right.
You say dissident right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because alt-right makes no sense to me, because there is no other alternative on the right, because you don't have a right in the United States until the alt-right shows up. What you had is a centrist part pretending to be on the right. So alt-right is just stupid. So, we'll say dissident right. So now I'm not even a person on the dissident right. I guess I'm on the cultural right. Okay. We can say that.
Yeah.
That I'm on the cultural right. I think that the thing that came up with this Black Panther movie, with people really being heated over it, and these videos got tens and hundreds of thousands of views critiquing this movie in a very emotive way. I haven't seen them, but I know the guys that do these videos, and they always do it emotively. Black Pigeon's got his very incisive inflections. Molyneux is a stage actor. I mean, he'll shed a tear. He'll manufacture that tear from nothing. And the Red Ice Radio dude, Henrik, who I love, he's got the shoulder shrug and the eyebrow raise, and he's just like, he can tell you with his body when he thinks something's really stupid. So I know these things are going to be addressed in a way that's going to be persuasive beyond words. There's going to be other things thrown in there to persuade. I don't think that these videos would have gotten traffic if everybody on the dissident right that, like me, saw the opportunity to click on this video was involved in more than one combat sport. If you're a kickboxer that wrestled, I don't think this would make any sense to you.
Okay,
so I think this is another aspect of how.
Okay, here's a question that maybe you can answer. So when you're training someone in either boxing or whatever combat art, do you go through this process where you have the fighter just try different things to see what is going to be, his weapon or his style?
You run them through the ground floor of the basic technical package, the biomechanical toolkit. And depending on your experience level as a coach, you'll see things pretty quickly, initially just based on his physical fitness, his stature, the length of his arms, the width of his shoulders, what his hips look like, how big his feet are, how big his hands are. You'll see things that'll point you initially in his structure that will point out where he should be going. Then you look to see if his aptitude, which comes from the connection between his mind and his body, where that allows you to go, because not that many people are going to be able to go the full spectrum. You're not going to have, particularly ingenious people that usually aren't full spectrum people that have equal abilities all over. So every guy is all over the place on what part of the skill package he's going to be that's going to work with his body type, that he's going to be able to biomechanically accomplish, and that he's also going to be able to learn first in his mind. Not everybody can learn something first in their mind before they apply it in their body. You might find out he's a stupid guy, and you've got to wait till he accidentally does stuff right and then say, okay, stop, do that again, and then start walking him back through it. you can't coach everybody like they're a coach. So you're taking your view of the field of experience and your subject matter, and you're trying to see now as the fighter where you fit into this and where you can excel. And where you can excel in one area might permit you to survive in another area. So you can't go in here with the illusion that you could be perfect, and again that you always have the right answer for something.
All right.
You have to be willing to say, look, that's just something I don't know about. People ask me some things about fighting, and I'll just have to say, that's just not my area. I can give you an idea of how I might try to skirt that area or penetrate that area, but it's not something I'm going to be able to teach you to do.
I think that it's very hard because people, maybe this happens in fighting too, where you get really comfortable with one tool or one concept, and that's all you want to do. And the world just doesn't work that way. And I'm talking about these guys who want to go around giving the Bellamy salute, the Sieg Heil at a university campus, and they're stuck on these concepts, and it's just losing concept. It's just not going to work,
You know what that's like? What you just explained to me. Guys that actually supposedly want to appeal to rational people and insist on using some type of iconography that's been successfully demonized, which is going to label you as an insane, dangerous, and even stupid person. And I'm not saying it should, but it will. If you're so hung up on should, you're deluded. This is like somebody insisting on doing traditional karate in the UFC octagon or in the boxing ring.
Yeah.
We are insisting on taking a concept and trying to subject another conceptualized space, a space that's been conceptualized according to a different philosophy, and you're trying to subject it to your concept, and it's not going to work. And you mentioned tools and concepts. The place where the thing that you just described to me is just idiotic. That sounds like somebody's being paid to fail, like the enemy hired them.
There is a very good chance of that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if we're talking about how tools and concepts usually work, the big problem with developing as a fighter and developing a fighter, and also the big opportunity, is when they find their concept their concept of combat that they've had is shattered, or it has to be changed to deal with what they're facing with. It could be your concept as a boxer dealing with a wrestler. It could be your concept of self-defense as a karate guy when somebody tries to run you over with a car. You might be rethinking the dictum that you always have to be rooted in your stance when somebody's trying to run you over with a car. And then you might be able to take that giant leap and pare it down to the 300-pound dude that's trying to run you over and say, you know what, maybe to me he is a car, and maybe I should abandon the rooted stance. You have tools that are used under different conceptual packages. So the way I communicate one way I communicate one form of fighting to another is to try to look at the same tool that's being used in different arts as the point of engagement for working with somebody. If I've got somebody that's an MMA fighter, or I could say a Taekwondo man. If I had a Taekwondo man that wanted to learn how to kickbox, I could ask him to show me his lunge punch. And most of the elements of a lunge punch equate to a jab. And see, this has already been done. This was done 45 years ago. Just about every Asian martial artist now, instead of calling it a lunge punch or whatever they called it, they now call it a jab, because they ended up finding out that in Western boxing, you had developed a superior and more flexible method of throwing the lead hand. So they've all borrowed it, and they haven't necessarily abandoned their concept, but they've actually changed the conception of how this one specific tool was used within their concept. And if you could get them to start working on a tool level concept, the concept of how you use this tool, then it might allow them to adapt to fighting somebody that's operating from another concept. last week we were speaking with Bob Ishmael out of Utah, and we were discussing hunting. And him and I have also discussed, we've discussed personal security and what do we do if we're on a parking lot and some guys want to start something. This is the type of thing that you do want to discuss with a man that's new to you that you're going to start spending time with. You want to figure out who's following whose lead in a situation. So let's say if Bob and I are out in the wilderness, I have nothing to offer him. Okay. All I can be for him while I'm learning what I need to learn to survive is I can be a tool for him. Maybe my eyes are better. Maybe my feet are better. Maybe I can climb better. Whatever he decides, I need to function as a tool in whatever area he decides I need to do that becomes my learning platform. So if I've got better eyes and he decides he's going to be a lookout, eventually I'm going to take over the spotting function so that it takes a little bit of weight off of him. And you never do that by asking why while it needs to be done. You ask why at the fire later on, after you're done. That's when why comes in. One of the most feminized aspects of our culture where learning is concerned is the idea that you ask why before you do it. Why is something that I tell you why you're doing the jab this way after the workout. Okay, but for now you just need to know.
Just do what I say.
Do it.
Yeah.
And do it because eventually your instinct takes the place of my voice and you have to be able to trust that. If Bob and I get out of the valley, okay, that we accidentally ran into or whatever, and he's used me as a tool in some manner so that we can survive this, and we're still out in, let's say, Wyoming, and we end up on a parking lot at a Walmart, which is nationwide the most dangerous place to be, a parking lot at a Walmart. He would immediately want me to take charge if 3 guys tried to start some violence with us. But he would have a bigger part to play with these 3 guys than I had to play in the survival situation because we're close to parity. One, he's bigger and stronger than me. Okay. So in the actual combat, he's probably more important. And what he does is more important than what I do. Okay. And the other thing is he knows he's worked on oil fields. Maybe these are roughnecks that came off of an oil rig. He's the guy that would have the ability to speak in their dialect.
Right.
And he's the guy that would have to negotiate anything I would say would sour things because they would immediately type me as somebody with some kind of big city accent from out east. And it would just make the situation worse. So even there where I'm supposedly the expert because I write all these, I've written 50 books on, how not to get beat up on the Walmart parking lot, Bob would still be the guy in charge in that situation because he's got more applicable knowledge.
So how does a young man or any man understand that other people have authority in different scenarios and to respect that? Because there are a lot of people online who want to be influential, they want to be persuasive, they want to advance the cause of the cultural right, but they're totally ineffective or they're sometimes counterproductive. How do you deal with that when you have, let's say, a fighter who he's really resistant to coaching?
We can break out of the fighter analogy here because you said the right thing and go right to the discussion. Use the term authority. We could expand that to masculine authority and try to stay away from moral authority because people tend to apply too much or too little to that term. In a given situation, the guy that's got the masculine authority is the guy that's got the experience in that situation. If it's my first day on a job as a plumber, the guy that's been doing it for 30 years and owns a plumbing company and has like a permanent waistband imprint, like right at the top of the back of his thigh, that's the guy that has the masculine authority in the situation. I haven't even learned how to let my pants fall down my butt yet. Okay, so where I have 0 here. Where, again, I start out as a tool. So first you have to recognize who has the masculine authority. And this becomes a crucial skill as you develop your interaction with men because, okay, what if it's Oliver and I walking down the street in Baltimore? We both know just as much about the setting, about the different threats. We both know more than we need to know about fighting and have the ability to do more than we should do physically to defend ourselves. So how would we sort that out? We both need to have enough social intelligence to get a read on a situation. Are we dealing with racist white dudes? Well, then I need a spot. Racist black dudes? Well, then he needs to speak. Is it a situation with a police officer? Well, I'm the guy with the gray beard. I need to be the communicator because I'm going to have more masculine authority with the cop. So you have to immediately figure out where you two stand, and there might be 3 of you, there might be 5 of you, where you stand as far as your relationships to each other and all your skills. This is why you need to hang out with people you know and people you do things with, and who is best suited to project a positive image of masculine authority to whoever you're interacting with. Maybe you're dealing with 10 guys and there's 3 of you and you need to not get in a fight. Who's the best guy to make sure a fight doesn't happen? Well, then you follow his lead. You don't immediately elect the strongest guy to step forward. That's something that somebody on a dissident right would do. Okay. We don't want to do that. Okay. We're not just going to say, okay, you know what? Jack Donovan should be the one to go out here and debate this person, right? Because he's the strongest guy. No, that's we send Jordan Peterson out there to debate this person, or Stefan Molyneux, anybody but Jack, okay? But when we're leaving the facility, if there's guys trying to hit us, we don't send Stefan and Jordan through the door or use them for a door plug. We'll tell Jack's big ass, hey, dude, you bench press 500 pounds, stand in the doorway, and don't let anybody in while we find another way out, okay? So we're electing you to hold the pass. You're Leonidas in Thermopylae. Whatever I have to do to appeal to his masculine image. So
is that something, how do you develop that? I don't know if it's natural, but I think it's not encouraged in our society. I think that in all of our institutions, we don't see authority. We see I think you call it like the pecking order, but I call it the bureaucracy, the managerial way of managing things, because you have procedures to follow, there are rules, there's all sorts of job titles and organizational charts, but there's no very very rarely do you find a person who's just simply in charge. You do what I say. This place runs like clockwork because I know what to do and I'm telling everybody what to do, which is a much more effective way. But so people are not really accustomed to that, and they don't develop that ability to say, hey, when we're walking down the sidewalk in Baltimore, James is simply in charge. I'm going to do whatever he tells me to do.
This issue of masculine authority, you can see it in even the military setting, where leadership eventually devolves into a type of management. You get a guy like Alexander that just frames the plan, tells it to everybody, and then he's the first guy out there. And he's heading towards the enemy line, and you're following him. Then you end up with a guy like Robert E. Lee that's there, but the weapon systems don't permit him to be the first guy out there without his brain being lost at the first volley. So now he's on hand to read the terrain. A 19th century general, his job was to read the terrain and to read the combatants and the men and everything. Then you get to the place where we are, where you have this machine warfare, and it's just management, and you have many more things go wrong now than used to go wrong with other forms of warfare in terms of how it should have come out. Okay, I'm not saying people can't win wars this way. Okay, but if you look at how they wanted it to come out and how it worked, Alexander had better results because he was closer to it than Robert E. Lee did. Okay, Bobby Lee had better results because he was closer to it. He was in it than any modern or postmodern general is going to have now. Okay, so what men do is they ritualize things to make sense of the world. And this begins in primitive societies with the initiation of the boy when he's becoming a man and he's taken away from the women. What you see in a managerial system is you see the ritualized habits of men of categorizing, grading, rating, integrating, all these types of things that men originally did on a hunt. In a managerial society, you see those things being applied to the feminine ethos of submitting everybody to one will. instead of having a tribal council where you're going to have men arguing with the chief, they're going to be arguing with the guy that's going to lead them up until it's time to go out and fight. And then when it's time to go out and fight, they're not arguing anymore. Right. They're following.
Right.
Okay. You're not going to get that now. Today, they're going to argue up until it's time to take action, and then they're going to be stabbing each other in the back while they're taking action. And it's going to happen in the military. It's going to happen in the corporate world. I'll give you one example. I just did a story about Grocer Joe. Uber Joe decided to hang up the keys and become Grocer Joe. And he kicked himself in the butt. Almost. He's not quite capable of kicking himself in the butt, but he said he'd like to for not seeking me out for an oral handbook on how to survive a month in the grocery business.
Yeah.
He's the only person of 30 that survives the hiring and training process. And then he actually gets a promotion right off the bat to become a shift lead in a deli. And he says this to me as if I'll be greatly surprised that she was a total bitch. I've spent 36 years in 34 supermarkets, and I have not met a single deli manager who was not a total bitch. Okay, and there's a reason for this. Okay, one is it's a place where 80 to 90% of the people who apply for a job in a supermarket are typed according to their gender for what they tend to be most good at. And certain things, you just funnel guys and girls in different places. In that way, it makes a lot of sense. So the deli in this food prep area is still just dominated by women. Well, there's not very many women managing supermarkets. Of the two women I know of who have managed supermarkets, they didn't come out of delis. Nobody rises from the deli to run a supermarket. And there's another reason for this, and it's not sexism. If you're a really good deli manager, then you affect the bottom line in that store as much as a store manager does. Okay, because if you're that valuable, the store I just came from, Gershbeck's, Bonnie, the deli manager, is the second most valuable person in the store, which is very unusual. The markup in deli makes it it doesn't make any economic sense to take that person and have them run the whole show, because chances are the next person in the deli is going to lose you more money than she made you, even if she was better than the guy that was running it. Okay, so and we can set aside the fact that women aren't psychologically set up for the task of running a supermarket. This is partially proven by the way they run delis. Delis are run as tyrannical queendoms. Okay, just the number of fight. I had two guys try to cut each other up in the deli with knives. I had to send a off-duty police officer in there to separate these two guys, and they were arguing over one of the women in the deli that set them against each other, whatever. Women inherently know that they're only suited for a certain scale of leadership. Anything that's above the size of an extended family that you would get together for a Thanksgiving dinner is not really something that any woman is capable of running without a man to basically get it all done for her. But men tend to be better at running family-sized groups of men and then running family-sized groups of leaders. And it's only a select few men that can then run those men that can run a family-sized group of leaders. So think of fives, okay? There's a decent amount of guys that you could take, maybe 30% of men could run a 5-man crew. By the time you get to extrapolating that out to managing a battalion, then you're down in the 1 percentile already. And then when you get somebody like Bobby Lee, who could command a whole small army of guys who could run battalions, then that's a very special person. And a managerial system is partially set up to account for the absence of that person, because very often that person is absent because they're so rare. So you have a military system. Our military system is based on the Union military system, which they beat Bobby Lee without a good general, okay, because they used superior material and manpower to do it and eventually grind them down and negate the presence of a genius on the other side. In that way, when you look at any of our corporate systems, any of our military systems, when you have a feminine way of looking at the world and you still want things to be able to run and not immediately fall apart when it gets to be bigger than your grandma's Thanksgiving dinner, then you have to start using all these ways of ritually measuring and organizing things. And you'll find that the study of military units and sports teams and corporate structures and everything, it's a very interesting subject, because you get all of these really ancient ways that men have dealt with things since the beginning of time being applied to something that's effectively unwinnable in the long run. Eventually, all of our companies and all our militaries just fall apart. All of our nations fall apart. So
that's a great way to think of your job. It's unwinnable in the long run.
Civilization is basically, it's taken a feminine ideal. It's taken a woman's idea of what would really be great and having men run it. And because we know women can't run it, and women know that more than anybody. And the first thing they do, all the department managers in the supermarket, the women, it's just a battle for daddy's attention, the store manager. I was daddy, okay, that my assistant manager called me the senator, because I managed to convince all these women who hated each other, that I cared about them all equally. Okay. Even though if we were on a raft in the middle of the Pacific and there was only one canteen of water, any rational person could figure out which one I wouldn't throw overboard. Okay. But I've got to be able to convince them that I care about all their issues equally. So, civilization. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about crafting our idea of what civilization should be when we're looking at the dissonant right. It's a masculine way of making a feminine ideal work. So you have to make sure you don't develop any of the feminine habits, because it's already not going to work in the long run, because it's a feminine ideal. And if you stop dealing with it like a man, then it's not even going to work for a little while. You're not even going to get it off the ground. And this is why the Richie Spence guy, I don't know anything about him other than he looks like a pretty rich boy to me. That's just my instinct about him. I don't know anything about the dude. But I heard him interview a guy named Paul Kersey. And I know Paul Kersey was a character in the Death Wish novels, so this probably isn't like a real name. It's probably like the dissonant right hand puppet thing, which I understand. The guy probably has a decent job, which means he's probably a really smart dude, and he doesn't want to lose all that for writing good books. I read some of his books. They're talking about football. And this guy, Paul Kersey, played football. He understands football. Knows some guys that met him. He's a big, strong guy, and other men feel good being around him. This Richard Spencer guy, at a certain point in the interview, says, well, us white men we can't do sports. We can't compete with blacks.
Oh, geez.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is what he's saying. Now, the other guy, since it wasn't his show, he was polite and didn't say anything. But I just about gagged right there. You can't. Anybody that's got that mentality as a man in any endeavor is eventually just going to fail the endeavor. He's going to fail the people on his team. He's going to fail himself. And this is what I told Uber Joe. And he got a job in a Baltimore City supermarket also. So he's dealing with a queen. Okay. I mean, he was really in for it. And I told him, I said, look, I lived with a black woman for 7 years. I've worked with as many black people as I've worked with white people, and I understand them well. And I said, there's one reason why I don't trust any women, and I only trust about 0.1% of black men. And it's because I don't trust anybody that's had a dick put in them. Okay, that's it. If you're going to let this happen, I'm sorry. You could be my mom. I don't trust my mom. She let that happen to her. Okay, which means you're going to let that happen to you. That means you're wired to submit. I'm sorry, Lynn. I know you got 2 kids. Okay, and and it's a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's that you did your duty to the family, to the race, everything. But if you're going to let that happen to you, then you can't be the one standing there deciding whether or not you're going to paint the deck or rearrange the deck chairs once a hole gets put in the side of the ship. Okay, you got to be the one to say, you know what, I shouldn't even be doing this. I need to go look after the life rafts.
Well,
okay?
I have no problem with saying that we should each do what we're good at. Without, right. I'd rather not say what I'm good at or not good at. It's not important.
Well, obviously you're good at cooking, because I've seen a parade of little heads, and one of them's got a pink ribbon in it, going back and forth behind your shoulder, and they look to be focused on something about hand levels. So they're probably eating little bowls of goodies or something. That looks like
okay.
a kitchen.
I'm okay in the kitchen. I get by. I don't want to make any promises. Look, you have to have a way of organizing the world, and that you've found one that works for you. Now, you don't have to impose that on others, right? This is what my question, another question, and it's relevant for you personally because you write for a living and your opinion is valuable to many. So people want to know what you think. So there's people out there who, and we know this happens, say, oh man, forget this guy LaFond. I'm going to unlike him on Facebook because he said something I didn't like.
I predicted 3, didn't I?
Yeah.
When I wrote that article, I predicted I would lose 3 Facebook likes, and I did.
How do you feel that it's sort of become your job somehow to influence people, but what does that feel like to you?
Okay.
Does that work for you?
I don't see my job as influencing people. I see it more as a boxing coach as winnowing people. And that's what I did. I'm not going to write an article like that every day or even every week, because I do need to eat. Okay? I do need to make a certain amount of money to have a place where I can plug this laptop into. So I don't want to lose too many readers. But if you can't tolerate every 40th article I write being something that's critical of how you view the world, then I don't need you as a reader. Okay? You're not somebody that I want telling somebody else, hey, this guy's really great. Because that's somebody else that you're talking to probably already knows you're a sissy douchebag, and you're somebody that's going to get mad at somebody and unlikable on Facebook, which is like this alternate photo album reality. When I was a kid, the biggest fear on earth when you met a new family of people is that you were going to go in there and mom was going to break out the photo album, and you were going to have to sit there and look at all these pictures. Well, you have millions of people that live inside of a photo album on a computer. So to a certain extent, what all masculine societies do, so a society, and the term society, I think, was used in the small rather than the big sense originally, where you had societies. You might have the Crow Dog Society or whatever kind of society you had, and it might only be 10 guys from 3 different tribes. And a society in a masculine sense was something that was supposed to expand beyond the borders of their particular tribe. It was a way of circulating knowledge and equipment, information. These are your original intelligence networks, your original secret societies. And any society, even the Air Force, kicks people out if they can't do so many push-ups. I got to believe you have to do at least 3 push-ups or something to be in the Air Force.
Even the Air Force. There goes a few more likes.
Oh, no. Actually, okay, yeah. I thought about that because a friend of mine is a really super fit guy, and I coach him, and he's an Air Force guy. So
okay.
Hopefully that's all right. Well, he'll hit me with a stick and let me know how he feels about the Air Force thing. But everybody, fire departments, police departments. For instance, in the Baltimore City Police Department, if you fail your citizens' right test 4 times, they're just not having you. You're only allowed to fail it 3 times, and then they'll just let you go. Okay? So you have to, anytime you're trying to select a group smaller than everybody on the planet, you've got to do some things to get some people to leave.
Yeah.
I remember this guy coming down into Mr. Frank's boxing gym at Loch Raven, and you could tell he used to be a real good athlete. He's just this enormously fat guy, and he's still young enough to compete. And he walks through the door, and Mr. Frank looks at him and said, "Good God, you're fat. Just leave. Don't even open your mouth. Don't say it. Go. I got 150 pounder here that could knock you out. Okay, leave."
And what did the guy do? Did he just leave? He left. Aw, sad.
Yeah. You used to do that with women, too. Turn around. I don't train women. Go. You're a girl. Leave. so that's it. And then after you don't do that to a certain amount of people, well, you spend You spend a few weeks trying to bore them enough to make them quit. And the ones that don't quit, then you put them on the bags. And you take them off the line drills, you put them on the bags. Then you try to work them enough so that they quit. And then you put them in the ring with Tony, and he punches them in the nose, and they start bleeding all over the place. And then most of the rest of them quit right there.
Right.
Okay? And then what you end up with there is a superior person, and he's worth all those other people in that setting. He's worth more than all those other people.
Yes.
And that's what I did. I got rid of those 3 guys on Facebook, and I don't want them back. Okay? And you know what? Maybe I'll lose another Facebook like, and what that is going to tell me is that one of my listeners got prison raped or he got molested as a child. Okay? And sorry, dude. Okay?
Well,
but that's it.
Good chance Richie Spencer's not a listener, but he probably wouldn't be a listener after that. Okay. So your social media update is that we hit 80 YouTube subscriptions today. Oh yeah, that's big, the big time. And we are up to 100. And your Twitter account has 119 friends. So.
Oh wow! Well, 5. So we got 5 in a week.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe Ishmael's, got us some extra subscriptions.
That's probably Ishmael's 5 sons. It's all right. But that's great, and that's what it is. It's a series of. You could say it's like it's like trial dating. Trial dating. Let's say a guy and a girl meet each other, and they might we're both gorgeous and handsome, but let's not just jump into bed just yet. Let's find out if I really hate the way you take care of your draperies before we get to this.
When you're talking in the context of fighting, it's the concept of what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, but it's kind of the reverse, because you're removing those people who weren't going to make it anyway. So it didn't kill me because I already was strong, or because something I already had inside,
Yes. And if you think about what Nietzsche said with that, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, in a lot of ways it's an idiot statement, but it's a really profound statement because it was coined right in the middle of the industrial age. And so you're talking about getting eaten by a machine, metaphorically by society, or in the factory, and literally if the thing grabs you, it is going to eat you. So if you avoid getting your hand ripped apart in that printing press, well, okay, now I know not to do that again. So yeah, it did make me stronger because it made me more adaptable to this danger. What we try to do in sports is immediately scare away the people that are not physically and psychologically going to be able to handle it, because our idea is not to hurt anybody. Because what you're trying to do is find the people that you can build up and help them get better. So you're getting punched in the face. The first time you're getting punched in the face, the guy is not trying to hit you hard. He's just trying to get you used to seeing while you've been punched in the nose. After a while, your eyes won't water anymore when you get punched in the nose. First time somebody gets punched in the nose, unless they're a psycho or they've been doing angel dust for like 20 years like Crazy Mark, then their eyes are going to water and it's going to mess up their vision. Things like that. You're doing what you can. Probably the best example of this concept we're talking about was what the Eastern Woodland Indians used to do, and it was termed running the gauntlet. Before they would adopt people into their tribe, let's say they get 10 people from a house that they raided, and this happened to a woman like, I think her name was Sarah Williamson. She and her family, and she was pregnant, the Indians took good care of her, and they made sure she didn't lose the baby while they were taking her. The one guy gave up his horse so she could ride on it, not because they're great hippie vegetarian humanitarians like we would like to think today, but just because they either want her as a mother of some of their children, or they want to sell her and make a lot of money off of her. So they want to keep her in good health, which most slavers tried to do. Once they got to the village, she was regarded of St. Francis. She was regarded as so valuable because she was a proven producer. They stole her husband, and like 6 of her kids, and she didn't lose the one kid that was in her belly even after she had to swim across this frozen swamp. So she's the mother they wanted. She's immediately bought by an Englishman who is really an Indian. He was kidnapped as a child and was adopted in a tribe and became a chief. And he bought her, so she didn't have to run the gauntlet because she was pregnant and because she had already proven that she was the kind of woman that you want in your group. Everybody else had to run the gauntlet. And that means if you're a child, all the children in the village stand aside the path that you're supposed to run on, and they hit you with a stick. And if you're a man and you're an enemy, they're going to try to kill you while you're running the gauntlet. Okay? But if you're a child or a woman that's been kidnapped, usually, unless they've had any women or children killed recently during the war, they're just going to give you love taps and let you go by. But if it's this acrimonious situation where, your soldiers have gone out and wiped out one of their villages, then they're going to beat the crap out of you when you run through. Whoever makes it through the gauntlet will get initiated into the tribe. And this is a pretty crude version of it. There was one guy that was grabbed by a bunch of Abenaki Indians, and he was just a teenager, and he refused to do the chores that they gave him to do. He said, that's woman's work. I won't do that. And he wasn't even officially a man yet. And when they made him run the gauntlet, first thing he did was rip a club out of somebody's hands, and he started beating the crap out of all the people on the sides, and they let him run through. Because they're testing for that spirit and for that physicality together. And that's a society where their racial makeup was based on who was toughest and strongest and smartest. They didn't care what
that's exactly
zoological
opposite
race
of what
you came from.
We're breeding for right now. What it means to be an
Right,
American
now,
of the future.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
they used to actually
We want the weakest and the dumbest.
Right. Right. So it's we're living in a totally dysgenic society.
Yeah.
And what I was trying to point out, and I did it in a very crude way, the way I wrote it. Okay. And in fact, I'm a gentleman. So, before I put that ending on the end of that article, I made sure that the person I referenced was somebody that hadn't been reading the site for a long while, so they wouldn't be upset or offended, okay? What I was trying to point out in that article is that if you're going to exclude other dissident people from the discussion because you don't like one specific aspect, then that's very self-limiting. You're not going to grow that much, and you're not going to have their help, and they might have been somebody who could help you. And the other thing is, and this is where hopefully I'll lose a libertarian here. If I could lose a like today and it's a libertarian, I'd feel better than losing a like from a guy that got prison rape. Libertarians, particularly Molyneux, they believe in debating. Debating is just toxic. Debating is just using words as a minefield. They're just used as weapons. This is the opposite of what words were originally designed for. And this is one thing that used to drive American Indians crazy about the lawyers that dealt them treaties, where you basically had fighting men making deals with lawyers. Well, I wonder how that's going to go. These guys would trust a guy that just tried to kill him more than they would trust a guy that twisted words for a living. So when you debate, you're just learning how to twist words. And I've always avoided debates. It's just an argument that's got technical points to it.
Yeah.
And what men should try to do, and most men that aren't suffering from some form of emasculation, which is maybe 0.1% of 1% of American men, most men that aren't emasculated, what they'll try to do is, in a big group discussion, they'll constantly be looking out for a chance to make sure they can build on something another guy says. And if you see, they're also looking out, particularly with a group of black dudes, older black guys, the way they work their get-togethers is you'll have one guy that's in charge of policing the invalidators. If somebody's just going to come in and try to tear somebody else down just to tear them down, that guy will actually get policed out by the guy that's basically the war chief of that group of old black guys at that bar. And then you'll have another guy that's in charge of building people up. He'll be the lead, like Hank down at Brennan's. He'll be the guy that's looking for a younger dude that says something smart, and then he'll amplify it, and he'll give the guy a chance to add to it, because you might find a younger guy, he says something that makes sense. He says one thing, and he'll stall because he's trying to figure out how to chain it together with something else. So in a debate, now you cut him out, you cut him off, and you jump on him. But in a discussion, what these older ghetto black dudes would do would try to predict what the kid was trying to put together and supply the second element of the thought chain, and to give the kid a chance to finish his thought.
Yeah.
So that he could say part 1 and 3, and the old man sticks in number 2. I do this all the time, and it works really good with employees.
And it's a totally different rhetorical technique. If you do want to be persuasive, it's the much better way to operate, I think. And you said something when you were talking about coaching too, which is that sometimes you just let the guy try a bunch of things and you watch for the one that he is good at. You wait for him to do something good, and then you try to encourage that thing, right?
It's if you can, part of it is psychologically, yes, you want to be able to give a compliment that's not phony, but that's the least of it. The most important part of it is most people have a hard time learning how to do physical things by absorbing words. Most guys that are good at coaching can no longer really demonstrate well what's supposed to be done. Okay. So what you want to be able to do is find something that he did mechanically correct, and then have him do it in slow motion and tell him what he's doing right. Okay. After the workout, you'll tell him part of why he was doing it right and why it matters. But you're going to walk him through the what and the how while he's doing it in slow motion. You want him to be able to learn how to catalog his own chain of motions as he's moving along and analyze them himself. Eventually, a fighter's not going to be any good. He's not going to end up with anything other than a tragic ending unless he learns how to coach himself. And the best fighters were good self-coaches, because you're just there in between rounds. He's out there fighting by himself the whole time. He has to be able to assess himself while he's in motion. His assessment of himself is far more important. If you properly coach this guy, you're mopping the sweat off, you're putting Vaseline on a cut, you're putting some water in his mouth, and you're telling him the one thing that he needs to work on in the next round, that he needs to focus on, the one positive thing that, okay, now you got to do this. And it might just be the same thing he's been doing all day long if the fight's going that way. Okay, so.
But it's a question of building up what you want and what you see that's good in others, that it works rhetorically also.
Yes, in a group thing, I think a ball sport would be more apropos, because we're talking about group discussions here.
Yeah,
we're talking about maybe a 10,000 person discussion on some website.
Twitter,
so
yeah.
Let's think of your sport, volleyball. Okay, nobody's trying to kill each other. We're not even trying to knock out the people on the other team. We are trying to do better than them. Okay, we're trying to defeat them in that limited way. But there's 9 of us. If it's a full size game, or 2 of us.
6.
If it's beach volleyball. 6?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's 6 of us, and really the most important thing you can do, I remember from playing volleyball, is to set up somebody else so they can make a really good shot.
Yeah.
And basketball has a lot of these elements in it as well.
Yeah.
Where you're doing something that's going to set somebody else up. Soccer, hockey, and lacrosse, they have these elements in them also, where they're passing games. It's gotten kind of rigid in football. But you see this lesson taught in all of these ball games that originally come from playing with an enemy head, and taking an enemy head and teaching your kids how to work together. So in any type of ball sport where you have passing go, this is what you're looking for and you're discussing. Ideally, if I'm lucky enough to have a discussion with Jordan Peterson, for instance, I'd be thrilled if I could say something that would get him to say something he wasn't planning on saying, or developing an idea that he hasn't been able to develop yet, and do a better job at it than I could have done with it. And that would be my reason for passing it off to him, because I'm thinking, okay, well, this guy's a conversational genius, and I'm kind of learning this. So let's see what he could do with this, because it's something I can't figure out, or I can't figure out how to express it verbally.
What's the masculine response when someone disagrees with you? When let's say you're in a tight group of men on the cultural dissident right, and you find some point of disagreement that people are perceiving as something important, and you disagree, how do men work that out?
You could say okay. You could pat him on the shoulder. You could shake his hand. You could do all three. Or you could just say, I'll agree to disagree on this point, but I don't.
But life goes on.
Want to. Yeah, I don't want to pursue a negative angle when we could maybe talk about 5 other things that we could both sharpen our minds on, rather than eventually descending onto a lesser level of discourse.
And becoming splitters.
If you think about how intellectual life started in the West with Aristotle, for instance, that's not where it started, but as far as intellectual discussion between groups of people that were working on ideas, it really comes from Aristotle's walk under the xystos. The xystos is the covered track. There's a pathway that goes all the way around inside the outer wall of the wrestling ground, which is what a palaestra meant. A palaestra is the wrestling ground. The goddess of the Palaestra was named Palaestra, and her father was Hermes, and you get the Hermetic tradition from him. Hermes was the escort of souls, and he was also the guardian of travelers and of people that conducted sacred contests. This is where, while you had guys boxing and wrestling and practicing the Pancratian in the middle of the Palaestra, the intellectuals, the teacher and his students and his assistant, would be walking around in a group. They retained the idea that men thought best when they were doing something physical. And this probably comes from signing to each other without making noise while you're on the hunt. It's probably eventually comes down to them from the hunt. They called Alexander's school the Peripateic school, and peripateic meant walking around. And this was a discussion. This wasn't just a lecture. You could have questions asked off the cuff, and one of the people would be assigned to recording what was said. So if you want to think about that and compare that to 2 people standing at a podium at a debate, this podium is borrowed from the religious institutions, where you're told from on high what you should think and what you should believe. And now you have these dueling podiums that are against each other. And both of these people, it is agreed upon by the position of the crowd, their opinions mean more than anybody in the audience. And one of these people is going to emerge the victor. This is really childlike compared to what Alexander and his teachers were doing, where they were walking around as a group of men and they were discussing things. So I would say that you would go all the way back and follow. I'm sorry, I said Alexander. It was Aristotle. Alexander was his patron. And by the way, Aristotle was not an Athenian, and he did most of his teaching and came to prominence in Athens as a resident alien. He never asked to become an Athenian. He was living there under their Zeno statutes. Zeno was stranger, so he would have been a stranger friend of Athens. He comported himself as a stranger. He was an advisor to the sons of the wealthiest people in Athens, and his assistant, I think Theophrastus, also came from another area. Isocrates was a guy that taught oratory and debate under Aristotle, but it was considered a lesser art than the search for the truth. So that's how we can encourage.
I think the search for truth is really where it ends up.
Jack Donovan was very critical of me, by the way. He did get me like 1,200 readers from critiquing my book after Bart Monet held his feet to the fire and said, look, I sent you a copy. I want you to review this guy's stuff. It's the most masculine stuff out there. And Jack agreed and disagreed on many points in the book, which I thought was excellent. And I actually wrote 2 books based on the points he disagreed on the thesis I put forward in the book. And that helped me. Now, where he disagreed was that the search for the truth had any value. And he quoted a friend of his that said something to the effect that, can the truth buy you a cup of coffee? And the answer is no, it can't buy you anything, but that demonstrates a materialistic
That's
slave
exactly
mind.
that. I disagree with that, and I think that the truth, well, if it's worth money or not, I don't know, but the lie will get you killed, much more likely. Sometimes the truth will get you killed too, but I think truth has its own value.
Yeah, so the lie primarily serves the purpose of getting others killed if it's done properly, and it's done well a lot. So you have a lot of people suffering and dying because of it.
You know, someone like Donovan, I don't know much about his writings, but I find it really telling that he doesn't value the truth in and of itself. And maybe that's not correct. Maybe he has a more nuanced point of view. But for someone to say that the truth has to buy you a cup of coffee is kind of anti-human, material. It's materialist, like
it's misanthropic, right?
Yeah, it's just, you know, if you're just put on this earth to march through space, then I guess that's fine. But I don't imagine why someone would be reading your website if they don't think that anyway.
I'm glad that he said it, and I was glad he said it when he did, because it underlies everything we do. Because the fact is, if you tell the truth too much in our society, you're not going to be able to buy a cup of coffee.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's our value more and more is, if you look at celebrities, for instance, how much money they make, our value more and more all has to do with conformity.
Yes. And that's what the topic was for the day, which was there is some internal human need for conformity, but there's also an internal human need for the truth, I believe. Many times you have to abandon conformity to seek the truth.
I think the best talk, it's in book form, and you might be able to find it on YouTube. Joseph Campbell, in the 13th part of his 13-part lecture, Transformations of Myth Through Time, told a story. I think it was a parable from India about wearing masks, and about why, when you search for truth and your search for transcendence, why you don't just want to put it all out there, why you do need to cover yourself and make sure that you don't just stick your head in a lion's mouth. So that's worth looking into.
Yeah, and maybe part of it is that you need to let some of it out there for others to find in their own path, in their own way. Well, James, I think that probably does it for today. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I would like to thank the guys from the Myth of the 20th Century for promoting my crack pottery, and I'd like to let them know that every time I appear on the Myth of the 20th Century, my book sales spike. I go from selling 2 books a day to selling 5 books a day. Okay, so so that's fantastic. In fact, my son was looking at my earnings reports from Kindle and CreateSpace. He said, "Dad, you haven't been on Myth of the 20th Century in a while, have you?" I said, "No, why'd you say that?" He said, "You don't have any growth. There's no curve here. It's flat. This could just be the same 2 guys buying more of your books." He said, "You got to do it on your podcast." So thank Adam and Alex and Nick and Hans and Hank for helping me out there.
Yeah, those guys are awesome. They do a really good job. I'm definitely a fan, and so I'll close by recommending the Myth of the 20th Century podcast. They are about 5 gentlemen that take turns presenting topics of importance from the 20th century. I would also like to say that James LaFond sells books, so you should go to Amazon, Amazon.com, and type his name, James LaFond, LaFond, and buy some books also. I'm going to try to remind people that at the end of each podcast now. All right, that was episode 30. Thanks, everybody.